Imagine being alone in a quiet supermarket late at night when a phone rings, but no one speaks on the other end. What if that call was more than just a prank? What if dialing a number unleashed something far more terrifying than you could ever imagine? Tonight's tale takes us deep into the shadows, where a man named Derek stumbles upon a phone number he should have never dialed. And what follows is a chilling encounter with something not quite human. So, put on your headphones, sit back, and remember, not every call is meant to be answered. This is the man downstairs. There's something inherently eerie about working the night shift. The world seems different when the sun sets. Streets that are usually bustling with life go silent, and the dim glow of streetlights makes familiar places feel foreign. Payless supermarket, where I worked, was no different. I'm Derek, 29 years old, and I've been working the graveyard shift at Payless for almost 5 years. Nothing ever really happens, except for the occasional shoplifter or a strange customer here and there. It's quiet, almost too quiet, and sometimes the silence gets to me. I started leaving the store's old radio on, just to drown out the stillness. But even then, there was something about that place at night. It all started one Wednesday. It was my usual shift, 8 p.m. to 4 a.m. The night was dragging, and the aisles were eerily empty. I'd already stocked the shelves twice just to keep myself occupied, and I was sitting behind the counter, mindlessly flipping through a magazine when the phone rang. Now, the store's phone rarely rang during the day, let alone in the middle of the night. The sudden noise jolted me, and I hesitated before answering it. "Payless, this is Derek," I said, expecting it to be one of the managers checking in. But there was no response. Instead, all I heard was faint breathing, slow and deliberate. I frowned, glancing around the empty store. After a few seconds, the line went dead. For the next few hours, I couldn't shake the strange phone call. Who calls a supermarket at midnight? And why would they hang up without saying anything? It was weird, but I brushed it off. The next night, I was back at the store going through my usual routine when the phone rang again. "Payless, this is Derek," I answered, but this time I was more on edge. Again, no response, just breathing. But this time it was heavier, more labored. And then, just before the line went dead, I heard something, faint, almost a whisper. 4, 5, 8. The call cut off before I could hear more. I stared at the phone, my heart racing. The voice was strange, guttural, like someone struggling to speak. The store was empty, yet I suddenly felt like I wasn't alone. I hung up, but the uneasiness lingered. I tried to focus on the rest of my shift, but the phone call kept playing over in my mind. As soon as my shift ended, I drove home, went straight to bed, and tried to shake off the weirdness. But sleep didn't come easily. The following night, I returned to work, but something felt different. The store seemed darker, the aisles longer, and the shadows more menacing. The air felt heavy, and every little sound made me jump. I couldn't concentrate. My mind kept wandering back to that strange phone call. Those numbers, 458, repeated in my head like a broken record. What was that about? Was it some kind of prank? But the voice didn't sound like someone playing around. Midway through my shift, I decided to search for the number. I don't know why, but I had this urge to know what it meant. Maybe it was a customer trying to reach me, or maybe it was something else. I Googled 458 on my phone, expecting nothing, but then something strange came up. There were stories, urban legends mostly, about a mysterious phone number. People claimed that if you dialed a specific sequence starting with 458, something weird would happen. The stories varied, but one thing was consistent. No one ever made it to the end of the call. The stories mentioned a name, Longlegs. According to the legend, Longlegs was an entity of some kind, a figure that lived in the shadows. They said if you called the number, you'd hear strange sounds, breathing, whispers, but if you listened long enough, Longlegs would come for you. At first, I laughed it off. It sounded ridiculous, like something out of a bad horror movie. But the more I read, the more unsettled I became. People claimed they had seen Longlegs, a tall, thin figure, impossibly long limbs, and eyes that glowed in the dark. He could appear anywhere, they said. In your house, your car, even your dreams. There was no way it was real. It was just another urban myth. But then, my phone rang. My heart skipped a beat as I looked at the caller ID. The number was unfamiliar. 458-466-4355. I hesitated, my finger hovering over the answer button. Part of me didn't want to pick up. I knew it was stupid, but the stories I'd read were fresh in my mind, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was very wrong. Against my better judgment, I answered. "Hello?" My voice was shaky, almost a whisper. Silence. Then, breathing. My hand tightened around the phone. The breathing was slow, raspy, like someone, or something, was struggling to draw air. It sounded close, too close, like it was right next to me. I glanced around the empty store, my heart racing. The aisles were dark, the only light coming from the flickering fluorescent bulbs above. And then I heard it. 4, 5, 8. My blood ran cold. It was the same voice, the same words I'd heard before. But this time, it continued. 4, 6, 6. I slammed the phone down, my hands trembling. The number was real. It had to be. But what was I supposed to do now? I couldn't just ignore it. My curiosity was getting the best of me, but at the same time, I didn't want to find out what happened if I dialed the rest of the number. I spent the rest of the shift on edge, jumping at every little sound. I tried to focus on my work, but my mind kept drifting back to the phone call, the stories, and the legend of Longlegs. By the time my shift ended, I was exhausted, both mentally and physically. But even as I drove home, the number lingered in the back of my mind. I kept hearing it over and over, 458-466-4355. I knew I shouldn't do it, but the urge to dial the number was overwhelming. I made it home just before sunrise. The house was dark and quiet, and the only sound was the soft hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. I tossed my keys on the counter, sat down on the couch, and stared at my phone. I shouldn't do it. I knew that. But the number was calling to me, almost as if it had a life of its own. Before I knew what I was doing, my fingers were dialing the number. 58-466-4355. I pressed call. At first, there was nothing, just silence. I held the phone to my ear, waiting, my heart pounding in my chest. Then, slowly, I heard the familiar sound of breathing. It was slow, deliberate, like someone was standing just behind me, breathing down my neck. I froze, too scared to move. "Hello?" I whispered, my voice barely audible. No response, just breathing. But then, after what felt like an eternity, I heard it. A voice, deep, raspy, and terrifyingly close. "You shouldn't have called." I dropped the phone, my heart hammering in my chest. The voice echoed in my mind, repeating over and over again. I stumbled back, my hands shaking, my breath coming in short, panicked gasps. I looked around the room, expecting to see someone or something standing in the shadows. But there was nothing, just silence. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. Every sound, every creak of the house, every gust of wind outside sent a wave of terror through me. I felt like I was being watched, like someone, or something, was standing just out of sight, waiting for me to close my eyes. The next day, I went to work as usual, though I was running on fumes. I hadn't gotten more than a few hours of sleep, and my mind was racing. I couldn't stop thinking about the phone call, the voice, and the legend of Longlegs. Was it all real, or was my mind playing tricks on me? As I went through the motions of my shift, stocking shelves and ringing up the occasional customer, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The store felt different, darker, colder. And then I heard it, a noise, faint at first, but unmistakable. It was coming from the back of the store, near the employee break room. I frowned, glancing at the clock. It was nearly 2 a.m., and there was no one else in the store. I was alone. I grabbed a flashlight and made my way to the back of the store, the beam of light flickering as I moved. The closer I got to the break room, the louder the noise became. It was like breathing, slow, deliberate, and inhuman. I reached the door to the break room and hesitated, my hand hovering over the doorknob. Every instinct was telling me to turn back, to get out of the store and never come back. But I couldn't. I had to know. I opened the door. The room was dark, the only light coming from the flickering fluorescent bulb overhead. At first, I didn't see anything. But then, in the corner of the room, I saw it. A figure. Tall, impossibly tall, with long, spindly limbs and eyes that glowed in the darkness. Longlegs. It was standing perfectly still, its head tilted to one side, watching me. Its body was unnaturally thin, almost skeletal, and its arms hung at its sides, the fingers impossibly long. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. The air in the room felt thick, oppressive, like I was standing in a vacuum. I wanted to run, to scream, but I couldn't move. Longlegs took a step toward me, its movements slow and deliberate. Its head twitched, the glowing eyes never leaving mine. The breathing, the same breathing I'd heard on the phone, grew louder, more intense. I took a step back, my hands shaking, my breath coming in short, panicked gasps. "You shouldn't have called." The voice echoed in my mind. Without thinking, I turned and bolted out of the break room, the flashlight clattering to the floor behind me. I sprinted through the aisles, my heart hammering in my chest, the sound of heavy footsteps following close behind. I didn't stop until I reached the front of the store. I slammed through the glass doors and into the parking lot, gasping for breath. The cold night air hit my face like a slap, but I didn't stop. I didn't look back. I didn't go back to work after that night. I couldn't. I told my boss I was sick, but the truth was, I was terrified. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Longlegs standing in the break room, watching me with those glowing eyes. The phone calls didn't stop either. Every night, at the same time, my phone would ring. It was always the same number, 458-466-4355. And it always ended the same way. Breathing, whispers, and the voice telling me I shouldn't have called. I didn't answer the calls anymore. I couldn't. But the terror never went away. One night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, my phone buzzed on the nightstand. My heart skipped a beat as I glanced at the screen. It was the number, 458-466-4355. I didn't answer, but this time something was different. The phone stopped ringing, and then I heard it. A knock. Slow, deliberate, and unmistakable. It was coming from downstairs. Sometimes curiosity leads us to places we're better off avoiding. And sometimes all it takes is a single phone call to invite something unwanted into our lives. If you ever come across the number 458-466-4355, be warned. You might not like what you hear on the other end of the line. Until next time, my friends, sleep well and be careful who you call.